Hello, everyone. Welcome to our third presentation of the day. That will be given by Wayne McAdams, who's our senior project engineer here. Wayne's going to be talking about using PARCgraphics to do WPF binding, which adds some additional power, I think, to the graphics, and I think is a really cool feature and one that I've been using for years. But I don't want to spoil anything too much. So without further ado, let's let Wayne get to his presentation where we learn a little bit more about WPF bindings.
Greetings. My name is Wayne McAdams. I've been with Capstone Technology for 13 years and a customer for a decade before that. And currently I'm a senior project engineer with the company. And today I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about WPF bindings. What is a WPF binding and why you're going to like them. So let's dive in. All right, so the Windows WPF, what is WPF? WPF stands for Windows Presentation Foundation. So when I first saw those letters, I went out on the web, and this is what I found on the Microsoft website. Windows Presentation Foundation provides developers with a unified programming model for building line-of-business desktop applications on Windows. Okay, sounds like they pay their marketing department a lot of money. What does that mean? They have some more advertisements they read, but basically what it is it's a unified programming environment to allow you to build your user interfaces and build your applications in sort of the Microsoft Windows environment. It is the foundation of the DataPark visual environment. ParkView itself is written in .NET and WPF graphics. We have PARCgraphic designers and displays are totally built around this technology. And this allows for easy binding of displays and graphics. It allows for easy maintenance of the graphics of displays and to build compound displays and build that kind of cohesive look and feel that you like to see in a good application. I'm going to go through we're going to take a little bit of a journey before we get to WPF bindings because I just sort of want to cover a basis of how our graphics work. And our graphics work with by placing controls on a canvas. So what that language means, a canvas, think of a sheet of paper. Controls are the objects you drop into the page and make them work, and animate and make them work. Controls have properties, and properties can be animated to do things dynamically on your graphic. So we're going to start our. So controls are, to talk about WPF bindings, we're going to review the structure of graphics in general. We're going to talk about placing controls on a page. So I'm going to place a button. I'm going to place some text block. Let's place a square. Let's use that. Let's put one of our tank objects on the page. And while I'm thinking about it, I think what we'll do is we'll take that tank object and that square and we'll group them together and make them sort of a single entity. We can still interact with the individual pieces, but we can also interact with them as a group. Our control toolbox up at the top is full of WPF controls that can be used on a page. At the very top, we put all the common controls. These, I could go out on the web and see these controls in the web. These are standard Microsoft controls as part of the .NET environment. I went ahead and dropped a slider while we were talking about it. And as we go further down, we'll see controls that are more specialized towards the kinds of things we do in process graphics. So I'm going to drop this gel toggle button on a page because I suspect I'm going to want to use that later. And I'm going to show, as you go further down, we have a lot of ParkView specific custom controls that were written just for our system. And notice that a lot of these correspond to the actual displays that you see and the display types you see in ParkView. So we have down here, we have all the manual data controls to build data entry sheets and graphics. We have a logic design manager, so you can build logic displays in the graphic. And all those are contained in the controls toolbox. Now, when I go to the controls tab on the left, we could see every object I dropped in there is sort of in a tree structure in the controls tab. And you see where the view box, it added a canvas, another sheet of paper that I'm going to drop the objects on. And you see my rectangle and cylindrical tank, which I put in that view box, are in there as well. And just an FYI, these are in draw order. So that's when you do bring to back, send to front, you're actually changing the order of these in this particular display. So let's talk a little bit about control properties. We've dragged some controls on the page, and now we're going to take a look at what the properties of those controls are. So I'm going to come up here, and I'm going to, let's select the text. And when we look at the text, we'll see that it has all sorts of properties associated with it: size, shape, color, oh my, just all sorts of individual little bits and pieces that we can change on how that text looks on the page. Now, the first thing is to note is, like in many packages where you're dealing with graphics, we have common controls up in the ribbon bar, so you don't have to go looking for how to change those kind of things. And anybody that's worked in Excel or worked in any sort of Microsoft program would be used to seeing that kind of thing up in the ribbon bar, just common controls. And we can affect how the graphics, how that particular control looks by interacting with those controls up in the ribbon bar. But if we want to take a deeper look at the properties associated with this text block, we can go to the Properties tab over on the left. Now, here's an alphabetical order list. Why do I use alphabetical order? Because that's what I'm used to. We also have the used properties, and that means any property that's not default that you've interacted with. We have categorized lists, so you can look at those in different ways to find the property that you're looking for. I tend to use alphabetical because that's what I learned on. We also have, notice as I move that around that you actually saw that left property change. I can also go to the Properties toolbox and interact with that property directly. Type a new value in, and it moves on the graphic according to the number I put in. So I'll go ahead and change the top, and most objects are oriented towards the top and left. You set the top and left, and that's where it places the object. Change the width. Now you get to watch me type a new value in. We can change the text. We could double click on the object in the canvas and change the text, select and change the text, or we could just type it right in there. So lots of properties over here, but there are more. There is an advanced checkbox, and that exposes some of the lesser used properties in an object. As you see, there's quite a few things you can interact with and set on a control in a graphic. Now, while I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and get this gel button ready for a little bit of work we're going to do with it. Let's resize it a little bit. And let's get rid of that text because that's not germane to what we're going to be doing with it. All righty. So the next thing I want to talk about is, let's get to talking about some animations. Animations are where I bind external data to a control and then use that data in the way I modify how I display that control. So we're going to, first thing we're going to do is we're going to bring in a new text block. Let's get a new text block in there. And, I'll show you the Animations tab first. And let's open it up and get a new text block in there. And we're going to take that text block and we're going to go to the tag editor. And anybody that's done graphics before, I'm not showing you anything you don't know. We're going to drop that tag onto that text block, and that's going to bind that to that control. Now notice at the top it lists the control binding, but that doesn't actually bind it to a property. Since this is a text block, you almost always are displaying a value with it, so we also bind the text to the default control property. That means it's the the setting up at the top, and that binds those two together so that when we hit run, we display the current value of that particular tag. Now, I'm not restricted to using just the default binding for this particular control. I can actually go and set the U tag as well in the property level. I could go down to the U tag in the property level, and I could set that, and when I set that, it actually gives me some other fields to fill in, and I could set a totally different tag in that particular field to display the text. I don't have to use the default for the control object. So that's the quick and dirty run through of the structure of graphics and what they how they're built and the sort of standard way you use them. Finally, we're going to talk a little bit about WPF bindings. What WPF bindings are is they allow us to bind the property of one control to be used as external data in another control, like a U tag. So let's go take a look at how that's going to work. Well, step one, how do we attach it? By default, the PARCgraphics Designer does not show you the WPF binding button. So we're going to have to turn that feature on. And the way we're going to turn that feature on is we're going to go to the View tab up in the top of the Graphics Designer. And we are going to go to User Options. And this is machine specific, so this will turn it on for your machine. We're going to go to Available Sources for Binding, and we're going to hit Save. Now, it looks like it didn't work. Well, what we have to do is navigate off the control and back on the control, and it will reload, and you'll see that we have our WPF binding available to us. So now we have the button, so we can actually bind a WPF object to this control. So let's give it a try. Alrighty, I think I'm going to use this slider, and we're going to use this slider to mess with the text field a little bit. So the first thing I need to do is set my slider up a little bit. So I'm going to click on the slider, and I'm going to go to the Properties tab, and I'm going to set the minimum and maximum on the slider. Right now, by default, when you drag it on the page, it's 0 to 10. But that's not the output I want. I want 24 to 48, and that'll make sense in just a second. So now that we've set that, we'll go to the text control, and we'll go to the Animations tab. Now, see, we still have that default tag bound there, but we're going to change the binding for the text to a WPF binding. Now we're going to point to the slider as the control or the element we're going to use, and then we're going to go down and find the value of the slider, and that's going to be what we bind to the text property on that particular text block. So let's turn this sucker on, and let's move the slider a little bit and see what we see. And we see exactly what we sort of expected. We've got a good, we've got the value being changed by the slider. So we'll turn that off. Now we're not restricted to just binding one thing. Let's go ahead and change format mask a little bit, make it a little cleaner. And you'll see that that changes. It works just like a tag binding. The format, the masking, all that kind of stuff, it doesn't care if it's WPF or U tag. So as soon as you start doing this, it'll be very familiar to you. Now I'm going to go ahead and do another binding. Let's go ahead and, well, it's not in my list. So let's look at this checkbox, and let's hit the checkbox, go to the Advanced Properties, and let's bind, I don't know, how about font size? Let's bind font size. Now you know why I have it set for 24 to 48. And we'll go ahead and bind that to the exact same thing. We'll bind that to the value. And we'll turn that sucker on. And now as we move the slider, you see not only am I changing the value, but I'm changing the size of the font as well, dynamically based on that slider's value. So we'll keep moving it back and forth a little bit. We'll do a little circle with our mouse, and because I needed to add time to the presentation, so I thought I'd waste a little of your time. All righty. So we've done that. Now, what else can we do with that? So we can also convert a pass value, and it can be modified as well. So we're gonna do that as well. So let's use our trusty slider and our PV text box again. But now what I'm going to bind to is I'm going to go ahead and bind to let's bind to the opacity property. And so I'm going to find opacity in my expanded list. Now, a problem with this is opacity is looking for a 0 to 1, and our slider is producing a 24 to 48. So now we're going to have to do a converter. And I wanted to do this just to illustrate it works just like a UTAG converter, where you have to pop an expression in there to modify the value, maybe change it to different units or something like that. So we can put in our IV, and let's go ahead and divide that by 24. That gets us to 1 to 2, right? 1 to 2. That's close to what we need. So let's divide it by 2 again, and that'll get us to 0.5 to 1, which is inside the proper range for an opacity property. So once we've done that, let's go ahead and hit run. And notice it didn't change quite right away. Sometimes bindings, you actually have to move it a little bit. But as soon as you move it, you see it evaluates the opacity based on that equation. And now as I slide it back and forth, you see my opacity, my font size, and my value are all properly bound to the slider and reacting to changes in the slider. All righty, so now passing a value and mapping. So again, I wanted to show that the other conversion types work just like the expression does and just like they work in UTAGs. So let's now this is where the gel button that we put on the page comes into play, and the view box. So I'm going to select the view box, and I'm going to use it as a, and I'm going to affect the visibility of that. So we'll go ahead to the property and we'll pick visibility. We'll again pick we'll pick the WPF binding for that, and this time let's use the gel button. Now the gel button is actually a toggle. This is a gel toggle button, and the toggle property is called is checked. So we're going to search around for that guy and find is checked. So we pick is checked. Now is check's a Boolean, true or false, right? Is it checked or not? And the visibility property is not a Boolean, so we're going to have to apply a map. So we're going to apply our map. We're going to map the value true to the value hidden for the visibility property. So that is so by doing that. And we only have to map the 1 because the default value of the viewbox property is visible. So if it's not true, it's always going to be visible. So we click on this, and we click the button, and we reveal the hidden data on our graphic that we needed to see. Have a nice day. So nobody said there was going to be math, but we're going to throw a little math into this as well. One of the really nifty things with WPF bindings is that you can do compound bindings inside an object, and you can do math. So I added these fields down here at the bottom, a yesterday, today, and a difference. A very common thing we do is do aggregates, where we're looking at the value of average value for yesterday, average value for today, to date, and maybe I want to see a difference of that. So how am I going to accomplish that? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to bind more than one WPF binding, more than one text field into our difference, and we're just going to do the math with it. Now, for the first step in the animation, I'm just going to bind yesterday to it. And I want to point out a little trick I use. Whenever I'm doing this kind of work inside a graphic, I tend to rename. You can rename objects. And I tend to rename them. It just makes it so much easier to read what you're doing instead of PV text block 42. So I'm going to bind the text value of that with our standard binding, just a standard WPF binding. And when I do that and I go up and hit play, you see it worked. I got that value in there. But now I want to add another value. I want to get that today value in there. And I can't do that through the UI. I can't bind multiple things through the UI. So what I'm going to have to do is add an expression. And I can add an expression. And and then inside the expression, let's just put IV for, input value. That's the default value of this particular control, which is the WPF binding. And I put that in there and I turn it on, and you see it still works, except I forgot to hit enter, and it works. Okay. Now, so that's all well and good, but now I've got to get that other value in there. And over on the left, you'll see the syntax for how to bring that other value in from the graphic. And the syntax is to type, and we're going to laboriously type this in. So I'm going to type in minus, because I want to subtract them. I'm getting a difference, WPF value, open paren, open quote. And now I'm going to type the control name, which again I modified so it'd be easier to remember. And then I'm going to do dot property. And then close quote, close paren. So great. So now I have a difference in there. Everything ought to be great. I hit run, nothing. Okay, so this points out one of the things you have to remember is the data type. Both those text data types are both strings. So I'm going to have to cast them as doubles. And in an expression, I can do that with the field C double. And I have the syntax over on the left as well for this, so you can sort of see it. So I'm going to type C double, and I'm going to enclose the input value in that. And I'm going to do the same thing on the explicitly named WPF binding. And then I'm going to hit run again. Wait, what the heck? Okay, so now I forgot a format mask. So let's type a format mask in real quick so we can see what the heck that number actually is. And we hit enter, boom, we have a difference. So I could do math. You can make these expressions. My record is 12 different bindings in the same expression. You can beat that record if you want, but you can write an expression and do the math with the data you're bringing in, use the UTag data to bring in the data, aggregate it, do all the kinds of data transformations you can do with the UTag, and then you can take it a step further with these WPF bindings and do a lot more math on them and present the data in a way you want to present it. So let's wrap up a little bit. WPF bindings, as you see, are not challenging to use if you know they exist. They're simple to use as UTag bindings. They give us a lot of animation power without having to resort to scripting, which is almost always a good thing. We went over how to use the bindings using values to change the properties in an object. And the slider was a good example of that. So we used the slider and we changed several properties inside a single object, and that worked really well. We did our mathematics so that we could generate new data on a graphic with the UTag data that we brought in, so we can use converters to modify the value that we pass to the property. So now I set up this little process down here at the bottom, and I just have some values down here to look at. And I want to show you, I use a couple vertical gauges. I wanted to do a stacked bar chart. So where you add up several different kinds of fuels, in this case, into sort of a total fuel measurement. And you'll notice that I just used two vertical linear gauges. The first one is just showing the oil. The second one is showing the oil plus the bark. And thus it adds up, and I put that one behind the first one. And again, a very simple little thing, and I was able to build a stacked bar chart. I showed you the visibility with the gel toggle button. I'd also like to show you a mouse over visibility, which I think is always cool. I assign mouse over visibility to this vertical bar chart, and you see when the mouse is detected to be over it, it actually turns on a detailed trend of my two fuel flows. So I can use that to sort of expose more detail for data and use my space. I might not always need to see the trend, but sometimes I need to see the trend. Instead of linking a trend and it opens up in the middle of the screen, I have to wait for it to open. The data's there when this graphic loaded, and all I have to do is know where to move my mouse, and I see my data. So that's my presentation, and we're going to be ready, I guess, for any questions you have. I hope I was able to show you a little something, and have a good day.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for that presentation, Wayne. And it looks like there was a bit of a sort of sync or desync between when you were talking and the video, but hopefully people were able to still follow along.
No, we actually recorded it that way. You know how hard that is to do?
Oh, okay. That's deliberate, everyone. We did that on purpose. That's good to know.
I had trouble following it, and I'm the one that did it. So,
so it does look like we have a few questions in the chat. So the first one is, in layman's terms, what's the difference between a view box and a canvas?
So a view box is scalable. So when we group objects, we put a view box, we put a canvas inside a view box. We drop all the objects on the canvas, and then we wrap it in a view box. And the view box makes that grouping scalable.
Right. And the resizable, right? So it can start out this big and I can make it this big. And yes. There's definitely benefits to it. Okay, second question. On a published graphic, what does right-click tag info option do for WPF bindings?
I've never done it. I have no clue.
I think I can speak to that one, actually. So when you right-click and you say tag info and it pops up that little pop-up window, it's going to show you the value of whatever is in the U tag field for the object itself.
The default U tag, the
default U tag,
control level.
Yeah. So, and this kind of actually kind of bumps into a second question here, which is what's the point of having a tag on a control and then being able to set a different tag for the control property? There's an idea that you can actually bind multiple tags to a property. So you could have one tag maybe controlling the color of the object, but another tag be the actual displayed value, like in a text box. And the reason for that is maybe you already have an alarm tag built or something that sort of indicates when your limits are awry. So you want to show the actual value, but like we said, that background color, you want it to change based off of whether or not you're violating limits or things like that. So I guess I just answered the question for you, but am I on the right track?
You did a good job.
Okay. So that's one instance. And then the other one that popped into my mind was a tank. You maybe want to use the 100% value to control the fill for when it goes up and down, but you might want to show it in feet or meters. You actually want to show the level in its actual height rather than as a percentage. That's another example where you may use two different values to control one object. Okay. Let's see, another question for you. Where can I find out more information on the functions like CDBL that are available in the graphics editor? Is it standard Microsoft functionality, or is there a link or something?
That's pretty much standard VB.NET functionality. So just like our script editor, which is in VB.NET, the expression field in the PARCgraphics designer is VB.NET compliant. And C double is actually all the way back to VBA. Anybody that's had to do a data type conversion in Excel would be familiar with that.
Yeah. I definitely have used C double, C string to help with some of these things. What is the use of the template property?
Template property.
I think that might have been a question for our asset manager presentation. Yeah, I don't believe that one factored in. So I have one last question for you, in case somebody else has a last minute question. What's your favorite use of the bindings? And I have an answer too that I can share after you give yours.
Well, the first use I ever put them to that was really a good technical use was to build a pie chart, a user control. So I did all the math for the arc objects that controlled the 10 pie slices in the pie chart in hidden hidden binding. So I brought all the numbers in, and then built a few math tags to hold all the math, so that all those pie charts would draw correctly.
Okay, yeah, that's definitely a cool one. For me, it's being able to like flick a switch or toggle a button and make things visible or invisible, so that you can just like overload a graphic with way too much information, but kind of leave that unchecked. And then when somebody does want to dig in, they can flip the switch, and all of a sudden, the graphic has way more information than you started with. It's kind of like a magic trick.
As I mentioned in the presentation, you can have that extra information. The real power of that is that information loads with the graphic. You might lose a few seconds on the load of the graphic, but if you do a link to another display, that new display has to open, and that can take time. And the toggle that Adam mentioned is instantaneous.
Yeah, that's a great point. Is that it doesn't load when you hit the toggle; it loads when you load the graphic itself. Okay, let's see. Okay, one final question. Is there a canvas zoom property? It would be cool to be able to expose information based on level of zoom.
I don't know.
I think our answer for that is right now we don't have something like that. But as as bindings get more used, or we find that people are wanting or needing that functionality, we can definitely look at how to implement that in our development roadmap.
I like your thinking. So you're looking at a boiler, you zoom in on the superheater section, and once you get to a certain level of zoom, all the temperatures on the superheater tubes appear. But when you're zoomed all the way out, they're invisible. That's actually, I'm going to steal that idea and take credit for it, and add it to our development queue.
You have something for our next brainstorming session.
Yeah.
I think that's it for questions. So thanks again for your wonderful presentation, Wayne. It's good to see you. We have one more presentation today from Molly. That'll be in about 10-15 minutes, starting at 10:35 Pacific. And that will be our final presentation for the day. So thank you, Wayne, and I'll see everyone in about 10-15 minutes.